time, the Cro Magnons were imagined in mythological terms as an almost godlike superhuman race, especially when compared to their European brethren, the Neanderthals. This depiction may have been a bit Eurocentric, but whatever happened to the Cro Magnons? First, let's start with the Neanderthals, or Neanderthals, depending on your school of thought on the pronunciation. In 1856, a fossilized skeleton was found while excavating cave sediments from the Kleinfeldhofer cave in Germany's Neanderthal Valley. The 60-foot-long tall cave was discovered while quarrying limestone in the valley, a deep, narrow gorge where the Dussel River flows, and meets the Rhine 20 miles to the east in Düsseldorf. The cave was small, about 15 feet wide, 6 feet deep, with 3 feet of mud inside. It was just high enough to admit a man. The chamber's deposits were removed by 2 workers who found the bones, but did not recognize them as human because the quarrymen believed the cave sediments to be a contaminant.
At first belief, they thought it might be some chimpanzee-type creature because it was in pieces a little bit. And so they ended up first thinking that it was that, but it was passed on to a teacher who looked at it in the top part of the skull cap and said, no, this is not actually a chimpanzee. This is something much more close to us now, but with brow ridges and so on. And therefore we developed the idea of a Neanderthal. But Neanderthal wasn't Homo erectus in any way, and it wasn't Homo sapiens in any way. It was actually something quite different. In fact, now in a modern day with genetics, we can easily pick out its genetics versus our own, which in modern European census has something like 2% Neanderthal admix, going up to a max of like 4 or 5, and you get an even higher rate the farther east that you go in people that apparently got the admix from a mixed blend that was going on. And there's Denisovans too, so that's something much different. This is from a channel called Highly Compelling. He goes into anthropology quite a bit. I don't like his depictions, which appear to be AI generated sometimes, because he keeps using this same picture that looks like a half ape man and just dresses it, changes its hair, puts accoutrements on it and things like that. Although it's a very good depiction, I think that's something like Homo demansi and something that's much different than what we probably think of as a even modern form of human. But Neanderthal was quite an advanced form. In fact, if you took Homo sapiens out of the situation, Neanderthal would be the most modern form of humanoid on the planet. The Cro Magnon problem is that they ended up being so advanced over this that was going on that they kind of outclassed the Neanderthals coming through the middle of the last glacial maximum. And the Neanderthals apparently died out as per se. But they live on a little bit inside of our genetics that we still have to this day. But the reason that I wanted to show this is that they have, or this guy in compiling it, says that there's a Cro Magnon problem or an issue. And so we're going to go ahead and skip ahead and go to that.
It seems as though the modern human brain was suddenly ignited by a spark. But the evidence suggests that this spark did not happen in the Neanderthals' brains. Although the Neanderthals' brain was larger than their ancestors, roughly the same size as the modern human brain, we can learn from Neanderthals that size doesn't always matter.
Well, their occipital bun that they have on back of their head, elongated their head more. They don't have as vaulted of a cranium. The whole idea of the folds of the brain and so on like that would have also been somewhat different. And of course, certain areas of the brain would be larger and given more access in something like a Neanderthal brain versus a Cro Magnon type of brain. But this spark is something that I guess I need to address at some point, because that's what I've kind of been looking for once we figured out how it all kind of played out. And that's been evolved a few times now. In fact, they've now just came out with a paper saying the whole out of Africa thing has been destroyed, and that people come from different lineages and to a common point due to admixture more than anything. And so that leads me to wonder, well, how did Neanderthal ever come about and be so radically different that you can easily point him out? Just like Denisovan is something radically different that you can easily point out. The other effect here is that we have a modern human that comes along at 325,000 BC, perhaps up to 350, 360 at Jebel Irhoud, but it's an anatomically modern human, but it's not really a modern human, if you get what I'm saying. It's not totally there. It's all, sure, it looks like a Ken doll and blah, 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 and everything else. And if shaved up nicely and put in decent clothes, you probably go right past them without thinking anything. But that's anatomically correct. As far as a modern human having faculties, mental faculties, so on coming to that, it's been something that was quite a debate, that they were debating whether it was 160 or 180, 100,000 years ago, 180,000, and so on. And so you've heard this term, Homo sapiens sapiens. And so somehow in this taxonomy that we have for everything, humans got that extra little point onto it, to where you get to point out whenever it took another step, as opposed to giving it another name, because that would kind of ruin the idea that we're trying to push forward with this all humanity one situation, which I said just a moment ago had already fallen apart. Are you following me? But at this one point, this one person, a people, started showing up on the planet like popcorn. He'll talk about it. And they used to be known as Cro Magnon Man. The very start of the video shows something that looks like a Cro Magnon set of women that are going out and foraging and hunting in the edge of the surf. Seafood's on the dinner tonight. But when did that happen? And how did that happen is going to be a point of contention. You see, because we realize that all these other things that we have in front of us, if we were to step out of ourselves and look at it as an alien coming to the planet and investigating, if you follow me, then we have this one people that pop up like popcorn. And this idea, he even made recourse to it earlier and said that there's some of these thoughts that these people were like gods of this earth. They were over 6 foot tall males on average, larger brain than we currently have, females almost 6 foot tall, an incredibly gorgeous creature out of nowhere. Like, how did this happen that we have all this other riffraff coming into the last ice age, where the Younger Dryas event took and knocked down humanity, which I've talked about a few times now, there was a lot of things going on till that happened. Even the Y chromosomal data shows an extreme bottleneck with what came out the other end of the Younger Dryas event and shortly after. And that there were still actually Homo erectus forms on the planet, which doesn't fit anybody's idea of the way that this happened, and the little chart that you get whenever you're a kid, and it shows how everything went up, because there's something here that's still like third or fourth back on the chart, while there's another people who are, of course, the scientists and so on, looking into all of this and trying to make an assumption of how this all came to be. But there's that weird thing that I have to point in. There's something with the hybrid that happened that made this one form of human pop out, and it's not a hybrid with anything that we have any specimen of whatsoever that we could possibly relate it to. There's an idea that people have come with and said, well, if we got 4% Neanderthal and changed like this, that's not it though. There was this other change that comes about. Is it just the Neanderthal hybrid situation and it pops up a new thing? Well, no, that's everywhere. And everywhere wasn't a Cro Magnon man. Something that seemed like for a large period of time here, he dominated the world's stage as compared to even the most advanced thing next to it. When he steps up on the stage, he has a much more advanced toolkit. In fact, now looking back at it, it seems like within about 50,000 years, he steps right past the toolkit of Neanderthals, and that's just his Homo sapiens. But then there's another level that comes there that can't really be explained. We'll get into it a little more. Let's hear this.
Their thinking ability, at least in terms of tool making, wasn't very promising. Modern humans matched their tool making techniques in less than 50,000 years of existence, something that took the Neanderthals 250,000 years. Inevitably, modern human families advanced far beyond them. Their typical toolkit consisted of well over 125 items 35,000 years ago, including knives for cutting, whittling, stone saws, chisels, perforators for making holes, needles, scrapers for bone, others for skin, pounding slabs, etc. Many of these tools were attached to wood, bone, and antler handles, and all were made of these items, including ivory. In fact, ivory can also be steamed and boiled. In contrast, the typical Neanderthal toolkit consisted of between 5 and 60 different items, such as horizontal stone scrapers and blunted and double-edged rock knives. Indeed, the Neanderthal and those who came before them simply knocked two stones together to sharpen a rock, or they chipped away flakes from rocks and used these as cutting tools and weapons.
It really seems like somewhat of a natural progression, even if you look at it and you get to the point of Neanderthals. And that's something that's outstanding. And you can understand the natural progression getting there somewhat, especially being a more advanced one looking back at it. And you can kind of like, okay, then they were doing some real good camping going on here or whatever, looking back at it and being able to say, yeah, that fits. But then there's a leap that's made of sentience that goes along with this, and then another level of such that goes along with what we're dealing with now in a modern day is its form of sentience. And I tell you again that we've already made another little jump in that idea internally. It's not something that shows up on your bones and so on, but there are a lot of changes that go on that are slowly evolving us. And there's one that certain people seem to be going through in almost a second enlightenment situation, but at the same time it seems to be veiled because, well, too much BS going on the other side. Let's continue.
There was nothing primitive or Neanderthal about the early European modern humans. They were a tall and noble people, with broad shoulders, prominent chins, high rounded foreheads, and brains almost a third larger than those of the average woman and man today. In fact,
huge differences between this. They're no longer called Cro Magnons because once we got genetics and tested them out, and we got correct data from them back from 29,000 years ago, BC at Paleolithic cave, we found out, wait, this is here today. Are you sure this is not a mistake? Apparently they did it enough times to where they're like, no, that's this guy's genetics. Well, it's here. It's people that are here. So then that really, and you didn't realize it because you're not in the field or anything, but that set the world of archaeology and the whole idea of we're all one, and somehow one group of these people that are all one walked out of Africa, and all of a sudden, after experiencing some few winters, started rapidly changing into different people. That's not even the way that it happened. In fact, I talked about how there's, they're out of Africa version 3.2 or whatever, and then 4.0, and before they can even get that out, geneticists stepped up to the plate and said, no, it didn't even work like that either. F it. Seriously, there's a radical difference between the humans that are on this planet. And I know it sounds strange to you if you're somebody probably under 30 years old because they've been pushing ideas like this, well, really since after World War II, but it got worse and worse, or more and more concentrated of ideas, and then they kind of took it off in left field here with this idea that we're all the same, and all of that idea. At the same time, they want you to quit referring to even skeletons when they're talking about archaeology as far as race and even gender, believe it or not. Yeah, whereas somebody can pick up a skull like this one on your right here and go, oh yeah, that's a caucasoid. Yeah, he's got a little brachycephaly going on here, lack of prognathism, so on going on. Get somebody that's pretty good at it, they can look at traits and probably without any carbon samples whatsoever give a decent idea on when this guy could be. Strange thing is, when we look at Cro Magnon and stuff, that's carried on through for tens of thousands of years. People are looking at it as roughly about 50,000 years ago they must have shown up. Well, why do we have so lack of burials and things? Well, it looks like these people used to burn their dead and cremate them, and there wouldn't have been much left of them. Only in certain situations do we have this effect where you'll find a burial that's maybe in a cave in the right situation, in the right environment, and you end up getting something that's even preserved. And look, if you get a good enough one, like at Paleolithic cave, they could even, out of the occipital bone up in the head here and the foreign magnum area, get DNA out of that in something that's long past, as long as it's been stable and hasn't gone wishy-washy. Let's continue.
Early anthropologists believed that because early European modern humans were so far advanced physically, intellectually, technologically, culturally, and genetically in comparison to all those who had come before them and the Neanderthals, and because they appeared on Earth so suddenly, they may have been made in the likeness of the gods. Early anthropologists believed that the early European modern humans were so godlike, and the women so beautiful, that the Son of God descended from the heavens to make love with these ladies and make these women his wives, while
This is said in your Bible. It talks about it. It's Caucasians that are in that Holy Bible that we all talk about. If you want any clarity, Noah, whenever it goes through that situation, landed in the Caucasus Mountains. Mount Ararat's right there. So if you attach archaeology to what it said and everything, and the reason it's named Caucasus Mountains is it looks like that's the little holotype area where Caucasians spread out from. Well, they're not too many miles away from Göbekli Tepe and things like that, but we're going back tens of thousands of years before that, and also into a modern area where the people around the Black Sea and the other side of the Caucasus Mountains, right here, pinpointed around, spread out into modern humanity. But in your Bible, it talks about how if you eat of that tree, that you're going to die. And he says you're going to die that day. Well, crazy, this wise talking snake told the woman, the one that grew from her rib, and now she's about to eat from a magic tree because the magic walking, talking snake told her to. People don't get the idea that this is the story of parables that people used to have in older times about how things came to be and how the snake came to be, how the snake lost its legs. Well, if you have a wise walking, talking serpent, that's a dragon. Did a whole series on that. Don't want to go into it necessarily too much, but with this idea, the dragon, who did not lie to him because they didn't die, right? Right. Don't want to get into that necessarily, but he told her that no, they would become as the gods of this earth. But the thing is, gods are immortal in a way and live on for a long, long time, like the elves and so on, or perhaps forever. Whereas we have a finite life that we live here. Well, God had to shun him out of the garden because they were about to eat the tree of life. And in doing so, they would have been able to live forever and do that. It's just a parable trick, people, on the idea of explaining why we're apparently so advanced a creature upon this planet, became master of beasts and all these situations out of nowhere. And looking back, and at the time that these stories were being told, amongst this people that we're talking about, there were other people that were still far less advanced than them, that they went around and helped quite a bit to make up steps. And it still goes on today. But you wonder where that idea comes from in the Bible and so on. And now in the modern day, they would try to say it's racist or anything, but they were trying to rationalize how out of nowhere did we pop up at having all this stuff and such an advancement. You could imagine people that were in these advanced cities and everything, and going, well, how did we get here? And if you ever go, on a trip someplace to another area and they're nowhere near as advanced, and you'd be like, wow, and how did we get there? And that's twisted into your Bible concept too, of how there must have been something special again that happened to these one people that ended up heralding civilization. I know in a modern day when they try to look at it, they say, well, it popped up in similar places at the same time and so on. If you look at archaeology, it shows, these people were going around mingling with these people at the same time. in multiple places. We talk about the Yamnaya expansion sometimes, but it's bigger than that, as I've shown before. But this idea that she's of the gods and everything, if you find this real beautiful woman and so on, it's easy enough to attach it to be like, something happened here. The god Apollo came down, or, who knows what happened, made that happen. Just like in ancient times when they had twins, they would say one of them, which there's usually one that's a little bit more favored than the other. Even there's that show about Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito where they're twins, and he got all the good stuff, and he got all that was left, or whatever. And even though there's identical twins, there's a little bit of difference between them, and so on. And they would say, well, that's divine, that the god, it's by the gods, that type situation. And so pagans had this idea too. It's nothing new. Born of a virgin, having this sacred birth type situation, stuff like that. It's a real common trope. It's why they used it in the Bible stories that we know today. But there's other things and strangeness that's caught in these Bible stories, and some of it seems like they just mull over or mask over this idea of these gods of this earth type situation that goes on. I could make a comparison to the Sumerians and their tales and where that comes from, and ha ha ha, and Lady of the Rib and where that rib comes from with Ninti and so on. But let's just continue and let him go here. What happens to these sons of God and daughters of men whenever they got together because they were so beautiful?
Neanderthals were still living in cold, damp caves. The early European modern humans were 6 feet tall, with a massive brain and perfect body, and they strode about the European continent much like gods, according to some. Whereas Neanderthals apparently had a fondness for red, the early European modern humans learned to separate and mix these pigments, creating a variety of hues and colors. To mix and to arrive at the correct consistency, a variety of lubricants were employed, such as blood, vegetable and fruit juices, and a variety of animal fats. In order to paint on cave walls, early European modern humans used both a brush and their fingers. In fact, they used a variety of brushes that allowed them to produce a wide range of shades and strokes. In some cases, the artist simply blew paint onto the drawing via a tubular bone, creating a mist-like spray. As many of their paintings and artworks were extremely abstract, surrealistic, or composed of geometric forms and concentric shapes and ovals that in some cases formed abstract versions of animals or women, the early European modern humans artists had also invented abstract impressionism. In fact, they displayed an artistic mastery equal to that of any modern master, including Picasso.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard the story, most people have that get into this field at all, that once they saw Lascaux Cave and some of the other caves there, they were so enamored by it that they actually got some artists who wanted to come and look too, and they pulled them together. When they showed up, they were like, oh, we thought we invented this whole thing about how it looks this way and impressionist ideas and everything, but they've got it all right here in front of us in a cave from 30,000 years ago. What is this? It depends on the artist, though. So they could tell that that guy had an idea, an artistic eye, and be able to use that. He was somebody who was a little Da Vinci or whatever you want to call it. Picasso of the time, although Picasso's with that strange warped head and one big eye and all this type of stuff. So, but they have impressionist type ideas that are shown in that too, which shows you there's this deep thought that's in that idea. And wouldn't it be great, everybody listening, if you would be able to, in a moment, somehow take that back to the moment when the guy was in front of it talking about all the stuff and the animals and what season we're coming into, so what's going on, and we could all understand it. put a subtitle on it, or so on. I think it's pretty incredible. There's an incredible step with humanity that happened here at Cro Magnon, man. And it wasn't just like everybody's slowly blooming like they try to get the idea they've come across. There was actual interactions from these people, and a lot of people are full of hybrids, including the Cro Magnon itself, but we don't know what hybrid that was. And some people had to interject the gods into how that happened, and it's in your Bible there. But other people have interjected, well, maybe an alien came down, because there has to be something for a hybrid to make a step up as far as that goes. Must have been something. I mean, sure, you can flip a coin 10 times and always ended up on tails, but this even seems more complex than that. Even from a standpoint of Neanderthal to Cro Magnon, much less the other people that are really during this time are still extant on the planet. Again, a lot of this was cashed out during the last ice age and so on, and some people even made it past the last ice age. And even though we have them here today, that's because they're a hybrid of these people that we're talking about.
The early European modern humans and other Upper Paleolithic peoples' spiritual belief systems far surpassed those of their ancestors in terms of their complexity, originality, and artistic and symbolic achievements. Spiritual beliefs changed along with the development of the brain, of man, and of woman. As a result, the early European modern humans' understanding of and capacity for symbolically expressing the spirit world also significantly increased, going through what has been called a symbolic explosion. The civilization of the early European modern humans then came to an abrupt end. There is evidence that the Earth experienced a global catastrophe 12,000 years ago that resulted in the extinction of millions of animals, the flash freezing of mammoths with food in their mouths, incredible floods, and sea levels rising by up to 400 feet.
This is again that Younger Dryas event that I talked about. And let me tell you, whenever we were talking about this, it started off with a little poked up fire over here in the corner, where they were talking about how all the big fauna in North America went away when the Indians came over. And that's when they had a corridor going through there and blah, blah, blah. And somehow they showed up, and because the animals had never seen people, they would just stand there and let you kill them. And so that idea was in contrast with all these other things that people had found, even at that time. But again, there was an agenda. And there's still that idea today where, hey, we found people at 38,000 years footprints walking around in the Americas. What's going on with this idea that they only came across at this one period in time? Which, by the way, got changed. They figured out exactly when that corridor opened up, and then we found there were people here before that, like Clovis and so on, and Solutreans, and things going back to 18,000. So now they've all changed that idea, but they still don't want to give the people a boat. Whenever boating goes back to at least 165,000 years. It's kind of crazy whenever you get all into it. But this radical change that happened, that spark that kicked off that idea of not just painting, that we find rare examples of in caves, because these people didn't live in caves. They were already thatching stuff together and making houses out of wood and so on that are just long gone. It's almost the story of the three little pigs. And you think the most advanced thing that in that, they ended up getting a brick house, made of stone or whatever off of it. Well, the Sumerians were using bricks, fire bricks from way back when. In fact, in the ancient area of Canaan, we have Jericho, which shows that there had bricks going on even before that. An incredible array of people went through this, but then there was this sieve at one point where life on the planet here got put through a sifter, and a lot of the larger creatures on the planet, everywhere except for Africa really, because it was down so close to the equator, far from where this happened at, they got to continue to exist. Mammoths are all gone, saber-toothed tigers, the camels of America, any people that were here in the Americas. Just a devastating thing, and it's been proven repeatedly over and again, to the point that the people that were the naysayers got in on it to try to naysay it again, and now they're agreeing with it. Quite a big change in the last 20 years on this idea that those are, they used to call it catastrophism because people thought that some catastrophe happened and like a big flood, and they're all going to Well, yeah, it did happen. Mythology has a point to it. That doesn't validate the Bible and its flood story, which is a Sumerian one. But you remember how he said it was never supposed to happen twice? Well, the key was that this is already a story they had before, and it did. So Abraham left Ur right after Noah died. And he started worshiping other gods. It says it straight out in the Bible. But it also says in the Bible that the gods came down and made these people because they're such a beautiful, extravagant, regal form of humanity here, that it must be by the gods, or in a modern day we would say it's aliens.
In the end, early European modern human hunter-gatherers experienced a catastrophic end to their golden age. The fact that these intellectual and physical giants had indeed consumed fruit from the tree of knowledge is, however, obvious and apparent. The fact that these intellectual and physical
So, yeah, Raquel Welch. And no, she's not a blonde. It's just they tried to make all these Cro Magnons blonde here at the time, but she's a brunette. Anyhow, so there was one amazing people that popped up like popcorn out of nowhere, to the point that even themselves, looking at what was all around, was like, how did this all happen? This has all been faded into obscurity, but there was at one point, well, it's easier to say it this way. Once Cro Magnon showed up, he was the most advanced person on this planet, and he still is. In fact, he's helped to advance all of these other people so he could have friends. So there's not so much of a difference. Crazy that we're trying to push this idea that we're all the same, though, while there are still primitives, which don't get talked about anymore. Nat Geo doesn't do it, and so on, in jungles and in place, and still deep in the Congo and the non-colonized spots. Oh, colonized are bad. Really? They don't think so. Then again, that goes with that cargo cult idea. Anyhow, I thought I'd just touch upon this, which he called the Cro Magnon problem. Anthropologists rewrite history of Neanderthals and Cro Magnons, because there's a new step in our understanding of this, and it's changed all the way from the Neanderthal being a brute to somebody that you actually would recognize still to this day too. They were pretty darn advanced, a little bit more squat and tanky, but boom. Well, the difference is Cro Magnon, and how did he lose brain capacity, become smaller, and even smaller in height a little bit, actually quite a bit. Lost about a foot in height there for a period of thousands of years, and then bounced back up due to nutrition and things like that in the modern day. That's because of things like island dwarfism, are actually having to go through that strainer at the Younger Dryas event and calm it all down. You'll notice too that there were all these tales of giants and so on. That's because some of them did and some of them didn't. And then you have what's known as exaggeration. And then you have people finding dinosaur bones and going, well, if that's a leg bone and it's almost as tall as me, this guy was 60 foot tall. But these people were over 6 foot tall on average, and they found them all the way up to 7 foot tall. And that wasn't anything having to do with the pituitary gland or anything like that. These people were giants. And archaeology, when they were looking back at this point, said we took a step down somewhere. And after we took the step down, that's where we find modern civilization. And so there had to be a fall of man and all of that. But then also these people here are showing that they're somehow from the gods or the aliens or something. Give me an idea what you think down below. Again, I've got a whole box of alien stuff over here we could get into, but I don't want the channel to be about that concept. Although it does look like there could be an interjection here. It would have had to have been a hybrid situation go on, or somebody of their advanced level that they would have to be at could easily come and just tick, 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 and I don't know, you could make it up like Enki and his sister, where they turned around and made up some screwed up ones, and when they were trying to make their Play-Doh dolls that turned into people one time, and then they ended up clicking on some pretty fancy ones, and then the artist got a hold of a lump of clay. And then we have this idea of what we have today. Peace.